the helicopter comes in. We're starting to move towards it, and I'm just keeping my eye on the guy in front of me, and I feel this familiar little poke at my heel again.
Animal lovers, welcome back to Rescued by a Dog, the podcast about dogs that have actually saved their owners' lives. I'm Laura, host of the podcast, and today's episode is sponsored by my favorite dog rescue, Pippi's Pals, which saves perfect pups at risk of euthanasia in the Houston area and transports them to other locations. To check out their available dogs, go to pippispals.com or find them on Instagram at Pippi's Pals Rescue. And one more plea, can you give $5 to help keep Rescued by a Dog going? There are two easy ways to do this. You could Venmo me $5 at Laurabama, that's Laura, B as in boy, A, M as in mother, A, or go to patreon.com/Rescued by a Dog podcast. When you join the Rescued by a Dog community on Patreon, your $5 a month will help me to continue sharing these uplifting stories. For today's season finale, you're going to hear an epic, heart-swelling story about a human and dog who saved each other in Afghanistan. This is one of my favorites of the whole series, told by Craig, author of the beautiful book, Craig and Fred. Hi, Craig.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good to be here. Thank you, Laura.
All right, Craig, let's talk about your dog. What? Yeah. Most people's favorite thing to talk about is their dog.
It's definitely my favorite thing to talk about. I've made it my duty, my job to talk about Fred. Yeah, and it's been an incredible journey.
All right, so tell me about Fred. What does he look like?
So Fred has a unique look to him. I always say he was one dog tall and two dogs long, and he was white, just the purest white, and then he had some orange spots. You could look at Fred and find almost any dog. You could see a lab in there. You can see corgi, of course. You can see different types of hounds. We did his DNA, and his genetics go back 15,000 years to the early human and dog. So he's 100% West Asian village dog.
How much did he weigh?
He was 38 pounds. So Fred has a unique look to him. We came together in a unique place. I found Fred in Afghanistan back in the late summer of 2010, and it was an area that was really hostile, kind of just had been completely controlled by the Taliban for a very, very, very long time. And I was an intelligence collector assigned, kind of attached to a team of reconnaissance Marines, which are, some of our most elite fighters. And those guys only get sent to the bad spots. They don't send them anywhere nice. And, I'd been in Afghanistan for maybe about a month at this point, and we were getting kind of briefed on the area we were going to. Nobody had really spent any time in this part of Afghanistan. It's in Helmand province, and it's called Sangin. And some British Marines had been in there, but they lost so many British Marines that the British public actually demanded that they remove them from there. And there was no base, there was no infrastructure, there was nobody waiting for us. We would have to establish kind of a hasty fortification overnight, and then when we would be just kind of on our own. We didn't have a lot of support, and so we inserted in the middle of the night out of helicopters. We found a house up on a hill that was abandoned, and we filled sandbags all night and just tried to fortify it as best we could. And, we were really prepared for the worst. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, we were attacked from sunup to sundown by, 150 to 200 Taliban fighters that were just intent on running us off that hill. And that was just some of the most intense times of that conflict. And, in the middle of all that fighting, and this is a big part of what makes Fred so special, I was on the wall with my gun and just returning fire, and some rounds impacted the wall in front of me, and I got some dirt in my eye, and I poured some water on my face to get the dirt out of my eyes. And I looked over, and there he was. And I don't know if he had like, I don't know, like a piece of dead rabbit or something in his mouth, and he was just trotting across our compound. It was this big open space with like an orchard, and that inside this compound that we were in. And like, here's this, like, it was just such a surreal moment of just like this, and it was almost like a light was shining on him, as he trotted across the battlefield in the middle of this firefight. It's the worst of humanity. It's war. I mean, it's the worst thing we can do to each other is to go to war. And in the middle of this fighting, we would look around, and it'd be like the middle of the day, it'd be like 100 and some degrees, and there'd be this little white dog just trotting around the battlefield, trotting around our compound, just like he was a show dog at Westminster Kennel Club. Such a contrast to be at war and to be fighting for our lives, and then look over and see this like cartoon character bebopping around. Just looking at him would make us smile. And after, I don't know, about like 7 to 10 days or so, the Taliban kind of got the message, and they started to back off and not engage with us kind of as directly. What they were really doing was placing IEDs around our position to try to limit our movements. But they stopped with their direct attacks, and it gave me my chance to do what I was there to do, which was to relay information. And so I pull out my laptop and I started typing away, trying to get reports back about all the tactics and all the things that I had seen, in those first couple of days we were there fighting. And I pull out my laptop, and I'm ready to write, and I see this tail kind of periscope across the top of my laptop screen, and I'm like, God, there's that dog again, and it really just, he just always just sucked me in visually. It just to kind of watch him. And I guess this is always the part of the story where I like to go, I like to flash back to little Craig. I always wanted a dog growing up, my whole life. And I campaigned for one. It was, I grew up in the suburbs of DC in Virginia, and we were a cat family. My sister got the jump on the pets, but I always had a little spot in my heart that I just ached for a dog. And I even took it so far as I bought a leash with my own money, and I would walk the neighbors' dogs after school, and, to try to show my dad that, my mom, that I could handle the responsibility. But it totally backfired. I heard them talking one night after dinner, and I'm sure I had like campaigned again for a dog, and they were like, "We don't need to get him a dog. He's walking the neighbor's dogs."
What did you like about their dogs?
It was just the connection, and the silliness, and the like fun. Like I've always loved having fun, and we all do, right? But like I've always I remember being a kid and like seeing adults and like they always just looked so sad, and I would always just wonder, like, man, is this what life is? Like, are we just all supposed to be, like, grow up and be sad someday? And like when I would see a dog, it was just like, this, let's have some fun, and dogs were always ready for fun. And so I think, flashing forward to Afghanistan 2010, there's still this little boy in me that's just, it doesn't matter if I'm thousands of miles from home in a really hostile environment. I just see a dog, and there's just a 9-year-old in there that's like, dog. One of the things that I had to relearn, or unlearn from the Marines was trusting my gut. I mean, because you have to follow orders so often and go against a lot of times your better judgment. And there was something in my gut just screaming about Fred, like, pay attention. This is important. And before I really think about it too much, I put my laptop down, and I have a piece of beef jerky, and I start walking towards Fred, and he's eyeballing me. He's got like a little kind of clump of bushes where he'd kind of dug. You could see where he'd buried stuff, and it was kind of his little den. And I was just like kind of talking to him, like, "Hey man, how you doing?" And keep in mind it's a rule, and it's a decent rule. That we're not supposed to approach the strays. Most of the dogs we saw in Helmand, and I always try to make sure people understand that my experience in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, is very specific. Like, Afghanistan is not a very big country, but you could be in Kabul and not and have a totally different experience than somebody in Helmand. The dogs in Helmand were not friendly. Like, they were just big, mean, and they roamed around in packs. And unless they spent a lot of time around American bases where they were kind of accustomed to getting fed and being around, people from the West who have different relationships with dogs. These dogs just never knew what it was to be taken care of. And so I'm walking towards them, and I have all of this kind of racing around in my mind. Like, we're not supposed to approach the strays. Like, I've seen dogs do crazy things to each other and to, at night when we're on patrols, and it's like all this is kind of racing around my head. Like, there's like the good and the bad, the angel and the devil. Like, this is a bad idea. This is a good idea. And, and all of a sudden he stands up, and I get a better look at him, and I see his ribs. I see he's got bugs in his fur. He's got hot spots. Like, he's just kind of a mess. And he's a little older than I thought he was. I was like, oh, he's like older puppy. He's like maybe close to a year. And I was like, man, just leave him alone. Like, he's clearly, been on his own for a long time. Like, this is not smart. But then I heard this thump, 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 thump coming from him. And he had sat down, and he was wagging his tail against the ground, and he's kicking up a little plume of dust. And that changed everything. And I came a little closer, and I stuck the jerky out, and he came, and just as obviously he's, starving. And despite that, he just very gently and politely and gratefully kind of took the jerky from my hand and chewed it. And I was like, this dog has like the manners of like a very well trained, very well conditioned animal. Like, and he's, he has no reason to be this way. He has no reason to wag his tail. So we spent a couple of minutes together. I gave him some rubs, and there was just such a connection. But at the same time, I didn't want to, take it too far right away. And I wasn't sure how the other Marines would feel. And so I stood up and started to walk back to where my gear was. And I feel a little poke down at my heel. And I look down, and he's right on my heel, and he's looking up at me like, yo, like, what's next? This is how he got his name. One of the other Marines, one of my buddies, Matt, was watching the whole interaction, and all he said was, hey, it looks like you made a friend. But I misheard him. I thought he said, hey, he looks like a Fred. And so I looked down at him, and I was like, yeah, we'll call you Fred. And I, not knowing, I just named my dog. Fred's journey from Afghanistan to America, is just a miracle after miracle. We defied all the odds. There are some amazing stories about our service members overseas getting animals home, and not to take anything away from anybody, but most of the time those service members, were maybe like at a base where that's where they were for the duration of their deployment, or most of their deployment. And so they had the advantage of being able to, kind of keep the dog safe, keep the dog fed, and arrange for all the logistics, which are very challenging under the best of circumstances. But we were only in this area of Sangin for like 30 days. All my worries about the rest of the Marines and what they think went out the window right away. Like our master sergeant, who was like at the time, I think he had already been in for like 16, 17 years, like just this salty, awesome leader, came over and was like all about Fred and loved Fred. And Fred started coming on night patrols with us, because what we realized was, the people of Sangin were caught in the middle. And during the day, the Taliban would use them as human shields to maneuver around right under our noses. But at night, we really owned the night, because we have optics. We have a lot of advantages at night in terms of just what we can see and do. So when the sun would go down, we would gear up and head out with local Afghani commandos and engage with the locals. Like we would just go and knock on doors and talk to locals and find out about their life and what it was like living under the Taliban. And what we found out was people wanted out. And so we started moving them from this fertile kind of valley where the Taliban really had a lot of control. We started helping them pack up their stuff and move up onto this little hill, kind of where we had our compound. And it almost became like we were like tactical movers. Like we would show up and people would have their stuff packed. And so every family, every person that we kind of evacuated from that valley was one less person that the Taliban could use as a human shield. I would go into these meetings at night with village elders and stuff to like just to talk and connect. And Fred would come trotting in to these meetings, and he would come on these like hours and hours and miles through mud, through fields, through canals, and he would stay with us through all these patrols. And I'll never forget one of the first meetings I had with these very like distinguished village elders with these long beards, and everybody's drinking chai tea, and Fred comes in, and I'm trying to make like a good impression, and Fred comes in and just gives me this big kiss up the side of my face, and then he sits down and puts his back against me and kind of watches my back. And I was like, oh man, like culturally, did I just blow it? And they all started to laugh, and I was like, like I thought maybe I lost him. But then they started to ask questions, and they were like, is this normal for an American? Is this how you treat dogs? And I was like, oh wow, okay, I've got an opening here. And so I started to talk about our country and dogs, and they weren't judging, they were just curious. So Fred was turned into like a little ambassador, and opened up this whole dialogue that ultimately led me to learning some really vital intelligence about the area and making connections that saved lives. So we were on a patrol, and the way we would patrol to avoid IEDs was like if there was something, if we needed to go into a village or to check out an area that was like 2 miles west of our position, we would first go like 2 miles south, like directly south, and then push west from there to avoid these belts of IEDs that they had been placing to try to restrict our movement. And then we would never touch a road or a trail. Like we were just cutting through brush, through canals, through cornfields. And so this one time we were cutting through a cornfield, and Fred was with us, but he didn't like going through the cornfields. He would like kind of trot around the perimeter. And we came out the other side of this cornfield, and the area had been cut clear. All the corn stalks were gone. And so it was just this big open field, and it was a really bright moonlit night. So it was kind of sketchy. And because we were a small element moving, through, and we start to move through, and everybody kind of spreads out in a long column, and we're moving through this open terrain. And all of a sudden Fred comes screaming through the field and cuts through our patrol, and he's just barking his head off. And we're all like, everybody takes a knee, and we're like literally as exposed as you can be. And we're like, oh my God, like this is really bad. And, one guy even like, trained his sights on Fred, because he was like, if he doesn't shut up, like, I don't know what I'm going to have to do. Somebody, I think it was one of the Afghani commandos, was like, he's barking at something. Like, what is it? And so me and a couple other guys moved over towards it. And there were 2 men hiding under a blanket, and they didn't have any weapons on them. But what they were doing was waiting for us to move past them. And then there was a bunch of IEDs that they were going to connect to try and catch us on our way back. Because Fred sniffed them out and saw them, all they really had on them was a couple of shovels, and like a pair of like wire crimpers. And we had a bigger mission that night, so wasn't worth detaining them. But I took all their stuff and took their pictures, and made them walk in separate directions. Just the couple of minutes that I was able to interrogate them and kind of figure out their plan, that tactic, that kind of operation turned into a report that I wrote that went wide and was went out to all the forces and this is how they, are they're trying to ambush us on with these IEDs, where they'll lull us into a sense of complacency because they will be able to move through this area safely. And so you think you can kind of maybe go back that way because it's safe. But they've come behind you and they've connected all of these IEDs. And so you'll be moving back, you'll be walking into, it's almost like a reverse ambush. We continued on. If you can't tell, I love telling the story, and I'll go until you stop me. He always knew where I was. He would go. We would line up our gear along a wall just before the sun would go down. We would make sure all of our radios were working and everything was in place, and we'd line up all of our stuff kind of in order of the movement that we were going to go on that night. And Fred would always find my kit, my chest, my armor, and my bandoliers, and he would always curl up and sleep next to my stuff, and then he would always sleep in my sleeping bag. And I have videos of him, that sleeping in. We had these little collapsible bug nets that we would sleep in, and he went in there one time and I zipped it closed and he just passed out. It was probably the first time he'd ever slept without flies, and bugs landing on him. As we got kind of towards the end of that particular mission, everybody started to get in my ear about, Fred and what was going to happen to Fred when we left. Of course, I loved the idea of, getting him out and making him my dog. The first step with Fred would be getting him out of Sangin on the helicopter back to this big American base called Camp Leatherneck, which is a massive base with Wi-Fi and, hot food and showers. It was almost like being at home. It was so large. And it would be how was I supposed to hide a dog I wasn't supposed to have in a place like that? So it was a huge risk, and it felt selfish. It felt silly. It felt, irresponsible. But there was this part of me that was just screaming, do it, just figure it out. And so I did, I think, what a lot of people would do. I left it up to Fred. I said, okay, buddy, if this is what's supposed to happen, if you follow me to the helicopter and you're not scared off by the rotor wash and the noise, and the dust and everything, I'll have a duffel bag in my pocket and I'll stuff you in it and we'll take it from there, And I didn't think he would. I mean, they have to train the military working dogs are incredible, but they have to train them to do things like that, to run, towards a helicopter that's barely off the ground. It's a really hot extract. And so we're all lining up. The helicopters are on their way, and and Fred's kind of just poking around, and I'm not really sure what he's going to do. And we're running. The helicopter comes in, and it's a big bird. It's a single rotor CH-53. These big, huge helicopters, and we're starting to move towards it, and it ends up being kind of a dangerous situation. It's something we call a brownout, where the dust usually, will kind of, when a helicopter comes down, it'll wash over you and then kind of pass. But when a brownout happens, it just swirls and it never settles. And so you really have low visibility and it can be really dangerous. You can end up, leading yourself into the tail rotor of the helicopter or something like that, because it's uneven terrain. You don't realize how high up you are. And I'm just keeping my eye on the guy in front of me. And I feel this familiar little poke at my heel again. And it was Fred, and he was right there, and he was looking at me let's do this, and I was like, okay. And I started struggling to get this duffel bag out of my pocket, and from behind me comes Top, the master sergeant. and he grabs Fred by the scruff of his neck, and all he said was, "We're doing this." We stuffed him in and zipped it closed, and it's just such a beautiful moment. Sorry. So we had to right away. We had to hide him, like, because there's a landing crew that comes with that helicopter, and if anybody outside of that unit found out about Fred, it could unravel the whole thing. And so he's inside a duffel bag, and the best thing we could think to do is like just being top. We both kind of instinctively just made the bag look heavy, like, and they'll just think it's gear. So we go running up the ramp, and there's a young Marine, and I'll never forget this kid. Like, he's just clean shaven, clean uniform, and like we're filthy. Like, we've been in the field for over, I think, like 30 days, and you've got beards and just dust everywhere. And this kid is he's like made out of aluminum. He's just this gleaming, young Marine, and he's like, "What's in the bag?" And top just like stiff arms him, and he's like, "Don't worry about it," And we get on the helicopter, and it's kind of weird. Like, you have this, maybe people have an image of like what it looks like to ride around from movies and stuff in one of these birds, but it's not sexy. Like, we're all piled in there. We have 30 days worth of gear on our backs, so it's like we can't sit in the seats. We all have to sit on the floor, and we're all in there like with our legs interlocked to pack as many Marines in there as you can. And I have Fred between my legs, and Top is sitting next to me, and the last Marine makes it in, and we start to lift off, and I look around that helicopter, and it's just these big, beautiful, tattooed, tough Marines with all their gear and camo and guns, and all I see is teeth, because they're all smiling, and they're all like quietly fist bumping, because they're like, "We got Fred, like Fred made it on, Fred's on." That ride was long. It was like over an hour in that helicopter. He squirmed. He was kind of upset at first, and then I unzipped it a little bit and stuck my hand in there. And as soon as he felt my hand, he kind of like settled down, and he laid down. In that moment, it was like I was so happy and so excited, and then instantly so like filled with anxiety. Like, wait, what did you just do? Like, and because Fred was, Sangin was safer for him. Sangin was all he knew. Sangin, yeah, his life would be short, but it would be natural, I guess, for the dog from that area, and so I was now taking him into a place where if I was caught with him, his life would be over. He would be put down without question. And, there would be some consequences for me, but I wasn't worried about that. I wasn't planning on having a long military career. Meanwhile, Fred is living with the DHL workers, the shipping company. So these DHL workers were all from like the Philippines and a bunch of different countries. They were all working on this base for DHL, and they figured out on their own. I wasn't sure how they were going to hide Fred. But there was a busy kind of compound where they had a couple forklifts, and there was always like, air conditioners getting shipped in, and just different supplies and stuff, pallets of stuff coming in all the time. And somebody figured out, that if they just anytime an American kind of, would come around, like a general or a colonel or somebody, some Americans would come into the compound to like inspect stuff or sign for stuff. And they had Fred on a long leash outside the office, like tied off to a pole. And they would take Fred and just walk him around and have him sniff crates and boxes. And like, they would even like tap on top of stuff, and he would jump up onto the crate and sniff, the crates. And so people just thought he was like a DHL contraband, working dog. So he was masquerading as a working dog. It was just so great. So great.
How long was he at Camp Leatherneck?
Was probably a month-ish. I had to go back. I went back to Sangin. So we came out and had like a week and a half break. and we got, hot showers, hot food, and cleaned all of our stuff and reinserted back into Sangin in a slightly different area. It was great. I mean, we really kept the Taliban on their toes. They had no idea. They thought we were just gone. But then it was like the third or fourth day. We would take a small team and take some Afghani commandos with us, and we would go and spend like 3 days out on like a long patrol through the green zone and through all these Taliban kind of infested areas. And on like the second day of one of those patrols, I got hit with a rocket. They attacked us with a 107 millimeter anti-tank rocket, and they shot those at us all the time. And usually they're not very accurate, but they got pretty close to our position and shot one through a wall. And I had been up all night and was just catching a little nap with my head against the wall, and it detonated right behind me. And it was just a mud wall, probably like less than a foot thick. And it blew the whole wall down on me and knocked me out. So they did the concussion protocol on me, and I failed a couple of the tests. And so they decided to medevac me that night. But we had to get back to our base, which was nuts. We had to wait till like it was like 1 a.m. and they kept trying to attack us because the house we were in caught fire. It was a crazy day, and I couldn't even put my helmet on when we were patrolling back because my head was so swollen. So they medevaced me out that night back to Camp Leatherneck, and meanwhile Fred is still there, and I kind of like came to my senses in this, like laying on this like hospital bed in this little tent on Camp Leatherneck, and was like, I got to get out of here. This is if I'm not in the fight, if I'm not in the field and I'm back here, I'm getting Fred out. Like this is my chance. So that rocket ultimately was a gift, because I would have been out in Sangin on that second trip for another couple of weeks. And who knows how long Fred, would have been safe kind of hiding in plain sight with those DHL workers. And, the concussion protocols weren't as strict back then as they are now. And I was able to kind of just convince everybody that I was fine and got discharged. And that gave me the time to arrange the paperwork and get a kennel, because that was a big challenge, was like actually getting him a kennel. Like I could order one, but it would take, weeks to get there. So Fred flew home we don't say stolen, we say tactically acquired. Fred flew home in a tactically acquired military police dog kennel. So it was like this big, nice kennel that a young Marine, took when no one was looking, and dropped it off at my room. And I love that, because like the military police would have been the ones that put Fred down, and here he is flying home in one of their kennels. The rest of Fred's journey, really to me is that as incredible and vibrant as that, the memory of getting him on that helicopter is, that was where people really stepped up. And I saw just the best of humanity when there's something, at stake, when there's something really beautiful at stake, and some people that never even met Fred, just heard about Fred, did things for him, stole things for him, like broke rules for him, to get him the rest of the way home. And, he flew, I got him on a commercial cargo flight out of Camp Leatherneck, and he flew home, and he was home 4 months before me. And my favorite part of the story is, or one of my favorite parts is, that it was my dad that took care of him for 4 months. And it's so poetic, because my whole life, all I ever heard from my dad was, if you ever get a dog, I'm going to end up having to take care of it. And he was right. After Fred got home, we packed up and all of our vehicles, and we drove to Sangin from Camp Leatherneck. And I spent the next like 60, 70 days in Sangin.
Can you describe to me the first moment you saw him again when you got back to the States.
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, that was cool. So I walked up to the house and and knocked on the door, and I heard this bark, which is so weird to be it was my childhood home. My dad was still living in the home I grew up in, and it was so funny to knock on the door and hear a dog barking from inside the house, and he just came out and just went berserk, and just was just he was so squirmy, like he was this long, strong little thing, and he would like just wrap himself around you. He'd be squirming so much and so happy that he like would almost like his butt could touch his nose. Like he was so happy, and I just lay down and just let him go crazy. My family and friends came over and everybody was upstairs, and I took Fred on a leash and we snuck out the back door, and I took him on a walk around my neighborhood on those same streets, where I walked all the neighbors' dogs. It was really cool. I didn't really appreciate the story for a long time. I came home and this is where, Fred rescued me, and he still is in so many ways. But the first kind of way that he did was just by being a dog in my life, and like being something fun and goofy and, energetic, and just pulling me out of my shell. But I was not going to talk about Afghanistan. That's just is what it seemed like people do, and like from other generations of veterans, like I had an uncle who was in World War II in the Battle of the Bulge, like just horrific stuff. But that was, at family gatherings, like that's Uncle John, he was in the Battle of the Bulge, and we don't talk about it. Who am I to come home and want to deal with or talk about or draw attention to anything that I did? But Fred had other plans, and I got a job really quick. I got out of the Marines when I got home, got a job working in the intelligence world in DC. And, 6 months after coming home, my life on paper was very much on track. I had an apartment, I had a new car, I had a good paying job, and, I was back home with all my friends, but it was, I was very much not okay. And I was drinking too much and ignoring a lot of issues. It was Fred that really showed me through this story that opening up and sharing yourself and being vulnerable requires way more strength than it does to be the strong, silent type, which is what I was trying to do. The way he showed me that was by, again, just being a dog. He walked so tall. He walked up, not just forward. Like he trotted and like lifted off the ground everywhere he went. I would come home from work. It was kind of a soul crushing job. And like going from Afghanistan, which I loved in so many ways. Like I loved the job I did. Sangin, when we showed up, was a hellhole. But when I left, our patrols were basically like going on walks to the farmer's market. Like it came back to life. And, Fred was like that in my life. Like he opened me back up. Everything just got in the way of being with Fred. Going to work was so hard because I had to leave him, but then I lived in this apartment building that had a big courtyard, and I lived in this tiny little studio, and our window faced this courtyard. And I would come walking through, and I would peek in through my window and see him, like on his back on the couch, and I would just be like so happy and so excited to like come around and come down the hallway and come in my apartment, and he would just go berserk. And I would take off my tie and put on some running shoes, and we would go for a run or a long walk. We would just go and hit the town. And walking him around DC, at first it was really obnoxious because everywhere we went, people wanted to know what kind of dog he was. And it was a loaded question. It opened up Afghanistan. So I got creative, and I would just make up dog breeds. people would say, "What kind of dog is that?" And I'd be like, "Oh, he's a pocket wolf," and move on, and people would usually humor me like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of those." Like, "Yeah, sure you have," and I'd keep moving. But one day at the dog park, somebody asked, and they asked it in a way that kind of left the question hanging out there. They asked it like very openly, like, "What kind of dog is Fred?" And they didn't follow it up with any kind of assumptions. And I was like, you know what? Like, screw it. He's from Afghanistan. And boom. And I like launched into this whole story. And this poor person who asked me a very casual dog park question ended up hearing this like 40-minute story about Fred and how I got him out and sang in and the whole thing. And I remember walking home and looking down at Fred, and he just looked back at me and he was smiling, and I just started to cry. From then on, anytime somebody asked what kind of dog Fred was, they got the answer. And I don't know how many people I made late for stuff, because they were just like standing at a stoplight, right across the street, and somebody's like, "Oh, that's a cute dog. What kind of dog is that?" And boom, they're like, next thing they know, they're like hearing this story. And I started like holding court at the dog park because people started to come and bring their friends, or neighbors to meet Fred and hear this story. And the more I told it, the more I remembered, and the more I remembered, the more like blown away I was by this journey and the unlikeliness of it all, and the miracles that happened along the way. And the more I connected with the version of myself that I had buried through the Marines. Like, they beat the individuality out of you. It's just part of the territory. And I had just let all the insecurities and anxieties and things that happen over time kind of pile on and really just suck all of my own kind of confidence out of me. And Fred brought it back. Fred reconnected me with it, because when I was a kid, you couldn't keep me off a stage. I was always up on stage, morning announcements, I'll do it. Like, if I can make somebody laugh, I'm going to do it. If, there's this, you guys need a skit, I'll write a skit and we'll do it. Like anything I could do to just connect with people, make people laugh. Like, I was always up there. And Fred, brought that side of me back, one story at a time, one walk at a time. And I was like, man, like if Fred, who is a dog, as human as I see him, he is a dog, was able to find a reason to wag his tail, then what's my excuse? I'm home. I have all my digits, like I have friends that were killed. I have friends that came home, with missing limbs, and like I have so much to be grateful for. It doesn't take away from your problem. It's not to say that you dismiss your issues. It's to say that you wag your tail at them and you find, the light in those dark moments. It's really a philosophy that's so like just so tangible. What Fred would remind us to do is to acknowledge those struggles, but then find that reason to wag your tail. And it can literally just be the blood in your veins and the air in your lungs. Like, that's enough. And it just shrinks your problems just a little bit, and it brings them in to focus and to perspective, and you can really navigate them a lot easier. And I'm literally living proof of that, because if I didn't have Fred when I came home, I don't think I would have lasted very long, to be brutally honest. No, we lost Fred in November, so it's extra hard. I guess it's the first time I'm really telling the story since he's. I love it. I love telling it. Sorry. Oh. The physical loss is what we mourn, but there's a new relationship with him, and there's a new connection with him, and there's a new appreciation for everything that we did when he was here. Fred showed me that life doesn't have to be this this thing that we just endure. We can have a life of service and joy and fun, and also be a value to society, to the world. Fred was a very stubborn boy. Like he was not a well trained dog, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. Like I loved his spirit. I loved that he always wanted to know what was down that path, what was over that hill, and we were going, whether we were getting muddy or wet or both. He loved New York City, and we called it New York Fred. It was like he got this extra like chip on his shoulder, and he would just like, walk around New York, and like even the like most salty, grizzled, New Yorker would like look down at him and like just smile. It was like you loved walking behind Fred because he would be leading the way and be trotting at the end of his leash, and you see people coming towards you and they look down at him, and then you see them smile as they walk past you. It was like it was such a special thing. If you lay down, if we would go to the beach and if you lay down, he would come over and put his butt on you, and he wouldn't lay down. He would look, because I think it was like you were vulnerable by laying down, and he wanted to make sure you were okay. And he would do it to me and to Nora and to our friends and stuff, but he would also do it to strangers. Like if we let him off leash at the park or at the beach and there was somebody laying down taking a nap or suntanning or something, you'd turn around and be like, oh gosh, I gotta go get him. Our wedding day was amazing. He was such a funny boy. He's the ring bearer, of course, and he had a little tux on. We got married on the beach on Cape Cod in my wife's hometown. Of course, Fred took off into the ocean in his tux after a seagull. It's so funny. Everybody was just like, there he goes. That's Fred.
If Fred were here and he understood human English, what would you like to say to him?
Oh man, so much. But I think he knows. He knows how grateful I am. I would tell him thank you. I would say thank you for rescuing me. I only rescued you once, and you rescued me countless times, and you still are. And I would tell him, like, people love you all over the world. Thousands and thousands of people are in love with you and your story and your message, and it's gonna live forever.